Paul Manafort is about to spend his first night in jail, and it could be the first of many. A judge saying today that she cannot turn a blind eye to charges of witness tampering that occurred as recently as this April. Quote, "This is not middle school. I can't take away his cell phone," the judge said. "If I tell him not to call 56 witnesses, will he call the 57th? Manafort will remain in jail through his trial in September on charges of money laundering and conspiracy. The president weighed in on this news with a defensive rant. Wow, what a tough sentence for Paul Manafort, who has represented Ronald Reagan, Bob Dole, and many other top political people in campaigns. Didn't know Manafort was the head of the mob. What about Comey and Crooked Hillary and all of the others? Very unfair. The president doesn't seem to understand that Paul Manafort hasn't been convicted of or sentenced to anything just yet. He's going to jail because he apparently couldn't make it to trial without committing new crimes. Trump's tweets keep coming as questions mount over whether Manafort will flip and cooperate with Mueller in the Russia investigation. But the president started the day with nearly an hour of media appearances. Here he is on Manafort.
Like Manafort has nothing to do with our campaign. But I feel I feel a little badly about it. They went back 12 years to get things that he did 12 years ago. You know, Paul Manafort worked for me for a very short period of time. He worked for me, for 49 days or something? A very short period of time. I feel badly for some people because they've gone back 12 years to find things about somebody.
Once again, the president has his facts wrong. Manafort worked atop the Trump campaign for about 100 days longer than Trump is claiming, and the alleged crimes that put him behind bars were committed weeks, not years ago. From the Washington Post, White House Bureau Chief Phil Rucker joins us. Harry Litman, former U.S. Attorney and former Deputy Assistant Attorney General, is here. At the table, Paul Butler, a former federal prosecutor, now a Georgetown University law professor, and John Heilman's back, NBC News and MSNBC national affairs analyst. Let me start with you, Phil Rucker. Quite a display, a spectacle is the word that comes to mind. The president holding court on everything. But really, I want to show you something he said about Andrew Weissman, one of the prosecutors who I believe has his name on all of the charging documents as they pertain to Paul Manafort. The president obviously knew this was coming, or may have known this was coming. Let's watch.
The problem with the Mueller investigation is everybody's got massive conflicts. You have Weissman was at Hillary Clinton's funeral, meaning her party that turned into a funeral. And they were screaming and crying. They were going crazy. How can you have people like this? So you have, I call them the 13 angry Democrats. You have a tremendous animosity.
Tremendous animosity. That's what he chalks everything up to. Facts be damned.
Yeah, that's right, Nicole. And it just fits a pattern from Donald Trump, President Trump, over the last several weeks, along with Rudy Giuliani, his attorney, to try to make this investigation seem partisan, to talk about the 13 angry Democrats, which is a term he uses over and over again on Twitter, to really discredit what Mueller's doing and discredit some of these charges. And, you know, now we have somebody for the first time going to jail over all of this. That's very real. I think it's quite frightening to people around the president. I know it is. It probably is to the president as well. And so he's trying to, you know, basically be the referee here and say this is unfair, it's tainted, it's partisan, it's a political witch hunt. But it's a real investigation, and it's serious, and the actions today show you how serious it is.
Harry Litman, let me read you Rudy Giuliani's quote to the New York Daily News today. He said, quote, "When this whole thing is over, things might get cleaned up with some presidential pardons." There's a pattern here with pardons. I want to ask you what that looks like to investigators. New York Times reporting that Trump's then lawyer, John Dowd, had raised the prospect of pardons for Flynn and Manafort the summer before they were charged by Bob Mueller. And I wonder what all this talk of pardons looks like on the day that the president's former campaign chairman goes to jail.
What it looks like is more obstruction, although obstruction that does partake of a very tricky constitutional legal question. So for prosecutors, they see it as more attempt to just not just scuttle the possible prosecution, but actually telegraph to witnesses, and in some ways even more offensive, to just sit tight, don't talk, don't cooperate, it'll all be good at the end of the day. There's a lot of reason to think that that is flatly unconstitutional use of the pardon power, but it's a question that actually hasn't been litigated and would put Mueller and company into tricky legal territory. But they certainly see it as more attempts to just flagrantly throw a wrench into the prosecution.
I want to go into some of the substance with you, John Heilman. The president also weighing in on one of the flashpoints in the obstruction of justice investigation, talking about, he was pressed on whether or not he dictated that statement that was crafted aboard Air Force One. Yeah. We know that everyone involved has been of interest to Bob Mueller and his obstruction of justice inquiry. It was on that flight where they crafted a statement for Don Jr. It was the flashpoint over which Mark Corallo, then the spokesperson for the legal team, quit because he thought he was watching justice
being
obstruction
in real time.
Yes. So let's watch the president try to explain that.
Mr. President, statement about Don Jr. Did you dictate the statement about Donald Trump Jr.?
Let's not talk about it. You know what that is?
But can you tell us?
It's irrelevant. It's a statement to the New York Times, the phony, failing New York Times.
Just
wait a minute.
To clear it up.
That's not a statement to a high tribunal of judges.
Understood.
That's a statement to the phony New York Times.
So did you dictate
in fact, frankly, he shouldn't even speak to the New York Times because they only write phony stories anyway. Although yesterday they wrote a nice story.
Mr. President, Mr. President, on North Korea, did you dictate it?
I don't even know. I have a question to formulate, so just go.
Well, I mean, there's so many things to look at there. Obviously, that is just, the simple plain truth of it is that's a question he did not want to answer and did not come close to answering in any way. He didn't lie, he did not lie. All he did was obfuscate, turn on the fog machine, and say next question, right? While throwing it through a few elbows at the New York Times. Right. If you actually tried to parse it in logical terms, his argument would be something like, the New York Times is fake news, so it's okay for me to lie to the New York Times, which obviously,
let's go through
which is obviously ridiculous. And let me just there's that, which is obviously ridiculous. But also, as we all know, when the president or one of the president's children, in the middle of an investigation like this, issues a public statement to any representative of the Fourth Estate, it is to all of us. It's not to CNN or New York Times. You're making a public statement from the office of the presidency or from one of the children of the president, as it happened, the president's involved in drafting it. He is making an official statement on behalf of the President of the United States to all Americans. And so even if you took the first argument, which obviously he was just trying to get out answering the question, it would be, even if you didn't consider it ridiculous, it would be irrelevant to the real question, which is, this is a public statement to the American people. You cannot lie in the middle of an investigation to the American people and to the prosecutors who are part of the American people.
And I guess the part of the answer that I thought was so interesting was that's not a statement to a high tribunal of judges. Well, Bob Mueller isn't a high tribunal of judges, but he is an investigator looking into the crafting of the statement and whether it was an attempt to obstruct justice.
It seems like he's trying to say, it seems like he's trying to say, I was not under, who knows what Donald Trump is ever trying to say, but to the best of my knowledge, it seems like what he's trying to say is, I'm not under oath. When I speak to the press, it's different if you're in a court of law and you are under oath, or in front of Congress and you're under oath, than if you are speaking to the press. And we have noted on this show and other occasions that it is not a crime to lie to the press. If it was, every president of our lifetime would have gone to jail. But it is the case that in the middle of an ongoing investigation, when you're making public statements from the office of the presidency, you are now entering things that will become part of the court record or part of the political record. So it's ridiculous on 25 levels.
And it's also where Scooter Libby ended up being charged with obstruction of justice and perjury because he lied to federal investigators about his conversations with reporters. So there was a lot of history of people being asked about their contacts and conversations with reporters that ends up getting them charged with obstruction of justice and perjury. So it is a legitimate subject of the investigation.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.